Good morning, everybody. My name's Olivia from DIA, and I'm joined with Howard. A lot of you know Howard, and we're also joined by guest speaker today, Chris Ashley from the Road Haulage Association. So just give him a hello, everyone.
Good morning, everybody. This is Howard.
Good morning, everybody. This is Chris. Delighted to be able to speak with you today.
Yeah, well, thank you for taking your time to come to us today, Chris, because we know you're quite a busy guy. So what we're going to do today, everybody, is to talk about how we can help the LGV sector as trainers, and also in terms of training, not just training kids in the car to be more aware of the lorries around us, but to be able to perhaps develop ourselves as well to help the LGV sector in some small way. We did do an LGV, how to be an LGV trainer, which I think was about 4 weeks ago. Which, we were supposed to have a speaker for that, but unfortunately Steve wasn't very well. He couldn't attend. And we also did one on the B and E sector, the B+E sector, with Steve. He was a guy who runs a B+E training school up in South Yorkshire. Is often working directly with the DVSA to help them with training needs, etc., with examining, etc., and qualifications, etc. So he's quite up with the B+E side of things. So we had a seminar with him, a webinar with him as well, and really and truly, those two previous webinars will link slightly to what we're doing today. The first thing I would like to do is to get Chris to do two things, really. Well, it's just what Olivia's got here first. Let Olivia do the bit on the next slide, if that's all right, and then we'll carry on from there.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So those of you who are regulars to webinars, you'll know that normally at the end of the webinars, we'll do a little bit of, a wind down, a few slides where we talk about, how DIA can help you and all the rest of it and what's coming up next with us. So today, what we're going to do is switch that around. So we get that important information in there first, and then that's out of the way. And then we'll hand over to Chris to share his knowledge with us today. So just so you know what we've got coming up next, next Friday we'll be joined from West Midlands Police. So they're going to come on a webinar next Friday, 11 o'clock, usual slot, and talk to us about blue lights, and they're going to talk to us about what to do and how they want members of the public and to respond to them. And I know being rider trainers, this is our bread and butter, but it's always good to be able to hear what they've got to say, be able to listen to any sort of pertinent points that they bring up, and also give you obviously again your opportunity to ask your questions on that. So Howard and I are also doing, as part of our DI Academy virtual classroom, we're doing our standards check series. We've kick-started the first series off. It's a mini series of 4 sessions over about 2-3 months. We started the first one last Friday, and then we got the next session in January, and we're starting the session with the whole series again on the 15th of January. We've still got some spaces, so if it's something that you're interested in, go to our website diaacademy.co.uk, have a little read on there, give us an email, give us a call. Happy to chat through with what if you want to know a bit more about that. So that's what we got coming up. Plus next year we're going to have an interesting calendar for you, sort of lots of different types of courses and things like that, and trying to keep it as online and as safe as we can for you, as long as we can. So so just so you know, DI members, you've got the support at driving.org. So if you've got any help or advice issues that you want advice with, then emails on that. That's something which Howard and I man, so we can help you with those all different issues that you might have in terms of your running your business and your membership, and we'll be able to answer a heck of a lot of those as we do. But should you have anything that we need to get some further information or sign to post you to someone more relevant, then we'll do that as well. But just so you know, we're here to help as part of your membership. So this is where I hand over to Chris and Howard. So over to you.
So shall I go first about just to introduce myself?
That would be brilliant. Thank you, Chris.
Yeah, okay. Well, if I cover off the first 2 points then about myself and about the Road Haulage Association. So my name is Chris Ashley, from the RHA. I joined the organisation in September 2019, so not quite 18 months ago. My background is I come from a family background of hauliers, although my professional experience is actually in the civil service. I spent 18 years working for the civil service in London, mainly at the Home Office, developing policy, and actually completely unrelated to transport. It was to do with tackling Class A drug misuse and domestic abuse. But the point of that experience was I've got a very good insight into how government works, or indeed doesn't work on occasion. Worked extensively with ministers and senior officials and with Parliament. So the RHA, I think, brought me in because I think there's a happy sort of synergy there between sort of my family background in haulage and then the professional experience I bring. And my day job basically is focused on the environment and the decarbonisation agenda. And we'll possibly touch on that a bit later in the webinar, but that is what I do. About the Road Haulage Association, so we represent 7,500 HGV operators across the UK, who between them operate nearly half the UK fleet. So the UK fleet is currently 500,000 HGVs. So they operate nearly 250,000 lorries. So, I think I'd like to think, we're a big organisation. We're able to sort of pull our weight, make ourselves heard. And our remit basically is to cover all things to do with haulage. So it's through to roads and infrastructure, drivers' hours and welfare, right through to sort of the current issues facing us, which is Brexit and COVID. And then, as I say, the emission side, the climate change side. So, we cover everything that would basically interest a haulier. So that, in a nutshell, is about me and about the RHA. And Howard, you wanted to say something about the third point?
Yes. The two webinars we did before, B+C and LGV trainer, how to be an LGV trainer, was webinars we did about a few weeks ago. Over the last 5 weeks, we've covered both of those. They're available on the Academy website. And if you want to go and look at those, they are up. We made sure they were up before we did this. So they are up there and can be viewed by anybody. And some of the things that we may be talking about today may link back to those two webinars. So they would be quite useful for you to look at. Steve was talking in the B+C, was talking about how the ADI could possibly diversify their business a bit more, as there is no register for B+C in terms of ADI trainers. And so effectively anybody who's held a license for 3 years and is over 21 years of age can be a B+C trainer, providing they can prove competence at doing the task. And that is what would be required, and making sure they've got all the right equipment. On the LGV training side, there is a law that came out in 2016, which was something that was missed on the European Third Directive, where it was originally said that anybody at all that wanted to go up with their categories on licenses would have to hold those licenses for 3 years before they could become a driver supervisor of that new category. The Europeans managed to swindle a way of being able to come over to here to be able to apply their trade as ADIs from European countries and come straight over here with their qualification and be able to, providing their English was good enough, be able to train with their qualification, and all they'd have to do would be to exchange, if it was for category B, exchange their ADI qualification by doing a standards check, and they'd be able to come straight over here and be able to apply their trade. We were not originally allowed to do that under the European Third Directive. That was in 2013 that came out. In 2016, there was an amendment made to it for car and motorcycle instructors, which now allows us to be able to upskill to category C and C1 and be able to train that straight away, because we are on, as a trainer that is, because we are on the ADI register, the DVSA's approved register. Now, the reason we can do that is because the LGV sector, the trainers there, are not on an official register. It's voluntary. We can't do it with the PCV because there's an official register for that. We would have to go and qualify as a PCV ADI, but with the LGV sector, because there is no official register, if we upgrade it again, providing we could show competence in the task, we'd be allowed to train in the LGV sector for category C1 or C, depending on what we'd taken the test on and got the full theory and category C licenses. If you've got grandfather rights on category C on your license, you at this moment are only allowed to do development driver training. You're not allowed to do license acquisition. You would have to take a category C1 test, a proper practical on-road test, before you could do license acquisition, which you would be allowed to do straight away. So there's one thing there you could do to diversify your business if you felt that that was the need. With discussion that I'm going to be having shortly with Chris during this webinar, we'll be able to see where the needs are for anybody to want to do that. So if you could move on, please, Olivia, if you will.
Sure.
Okay, so let's talk about the aims of the session first. Though what we intend to do on this session is to talk about the ECMTs, which Chris will talk about in just a moment. They're a permit that the hauliers have to have. We'll also have a chat about driver shortages, and Chris would like to talk about emissions and energy. So we'll see on all three of these things what we can do and what we can understand as driver trainers for category B to be able to help the LGV side of transport, basically. Okay, so if we move on to the next one, first of all, we need to understand what an LGV is. It's a large goods vehicle, it's also known as a heavy goods vehicle, but we tend in this country to talk about LGV. Europeans tend to talk about HGV. It's a vehicle that's over 3.5 tons. Most people think an LGV is over 7.5. It's actually categorized as a vehicle capable of carrying commercial goods and services over 3.5 tons. So we can drive up to that limit on our category B licenses. Anything heavier than that, except for towing a trailer up to 750 kilos, we would then have to have a category C1 for anything above that combination or weight of towing vehicle. So a LGV, the rigid vehicles, maybe up to 32 tons. Articulated vehicle, that's where you've got a tractor unit at the front towing a trailer. That can be up to 44 tons. But there's also the drawbar vehicles, which are sometimes known as wagon drag. They can also be up to 44 tons in combination weight as well on an LGV license. So if we move on, please. So what we'd like to do, if you would, Chris, if you can explain what the ECMT permits are and how important they are, and then I can have a chat after you've finished and say what we can do in our side of the industry to help.
Yeah, no, thank you, Howard. So, I mean, ECMT, basically, it's all tied up with the Brexit negotiations. And, you know, I think we're all aware that where we stand generally on Brexit negotiations, there's this continuing standoff, a high degree of uncertainty, frankly, in terms of how Brexit is going to materialise. Not for me to comment on that, other than I think to say that, you know, we are where we are, and clearly what happens over the next few days and indeed weeks will have a material effect, you know, in whatever happens for the haulage industry. So unsurprisingly, this is a huge topic for us. And it's nice actually just to spend an hour away from it to be able to talk to you, just to give the perspective. ECMT permits, just to explain what they are. Okay, so whilst we're, you know, in this transition period, whilst, you know, we are still kind of half in, half out of the EU, ECMT permits don't apply because haulage ability to sort of move across to the continent, and likewise hauliers from the continent to come into the UK, that's all governed under the EU. under a so-called license, which allows haulage operations to function in the way that they do. Now, the thing is, because we're coming out of the EU, and in the absence of a trade deal, and this is a critical point, in the absence of a trade deal, it's likely that we're going to revert back to the system that was in place before we joined the European community, which is this ECMT permit system, which is an international system. It's administered by the IRU, the International Road Union, which basically allows hauliers worldwide, essentially, to transit each other's countries. Now, clearly, there is commercial implications there, and you know, in order to, I think, to protect domestic markets, so that there isn't perceived unfair foreign competition from hauliers, shall I say, beyond the EU. Let's keep that out of the picture for the moment. There's a system of ECMT permits, which basically there is a permit system. It's a piece of paper, essentially, which is allocated, the number of which is allocated on a quota basis. Now, this is quite a fast-moving topic, because up until yesterday, where we were very uncertain, and still are very uncertain as to how the Brexit negotiations will materialise. But anyway, up until yesterday, we were facing a situation where, come 1st of January, we would be reverting to this ECMT permit system. However, the number of permits allowed under the quota system caters for 10%, that's 10% of what would otherwise be needed to maintain that seamless flow, i.e. it's a very restrictive, potentially a very restrictive outcome. Now, but things moved on yesterday, because the Brexit negotiations are still ongoing, and you will be aware that the EU then published their contingency measures in the event of a sort of a no-deal outcome, certainly for the 1st of January. They published and said that the current license system that we operate under to allow haulage, to move freely to the continent, that will continue for another 6 months, until June of 2021. And would then be reviewed in that situation. And of course, then this is all pending whether we get a trade deal or not. It's all a bit complex. It's all a bit up in the air. We are less than 3 weeks, or maybe 3 weeks away from the 1st of January. And there's just this highly uncertain situation we face. And so the RHA's perspective right now, and you may have seen us on the television quite extensively now, is we are just pressing for clarity from the government, and indeed from the European Union, as to what the measures will be come the 1st of January. But I hope I've been able to just describe to you the high degree of uncertainty we currently face at the moment, and what the ECMT system would look like if it comes to it. But I hasten to add that if there was a trade deal, then we won't be resorting to ECMT, but some other, agreement with the EU. I think I'll leave it there for now, because the devil's in the detail.
The situation with these here, though, Chris, is that this affects any vehicle over 7.5 tons, doesn't it? So
3.5.
So we've got a lot of vehicles this can affect. Now, this does therefore mean then that we could have an awful lot of vehicles around the ports being stacked.
Yes.
Yeah, because we will know on Sunday, really. I mean, I know this is recorded, this session, but we are today at the 11th of December, 12th December, 11th December. This Sunday coming up, which is 3 days time, the talks stop. So if they don't get a result by Sunday, we will know really Monday morning what's going to happen. But so when it comes to sort of Folkestone, Harwich, these sort of big ports that we've got here in this country, any ADIs that are around that area can start to see the vehicles on the road going towards the ports being more stacked, because the flow of goods out of this country with the tariffs that will take place if there's no deal is certainly going to slow. So we can expect a bigger volume of traffic. So as ADIs, we start to have to perhaps involve ourselves in a bit more training with our youngsters, with our learners especially. And if you're doing fleet work, just put a shot across their bows, the license holders' bows, that these lorries are going to be moved and diverted. They're going to take different courses of the road. They're going to be doing lane changes on motorways and dual carriages as they're diverted off for stacking areas. And these are the sort of things that are going to affect us. But in terms of the economy, with things like things coming into the country, does this mean, even if we don't get a deal, are we going to have, do you think, more of the European lorries and foreign lorries over here around?
Well, I mean, yesterday's announcement of this 6-month extension in the event of no deal, that issue kind of goes away a little bit, certainly for the next 6 months, because you're right, up until yesterday, it was a huge issue for us, because the way the politics of this was that the UK government was happy to basically recognise foreign hauliers, to ensure the seamless flow of trade from the continent. But unsurprisingly, the EU weren't, whilst these negotiations are still going on. As I say, that issue about foreign hauliers coming into the country and UK hauliers not being able to go into Europe, that's gone away now for at least 6 months, until we know kind of where we stand with the European Union more generally, and as to whether there'll be a deal. Just to pick up on your earlier point, though, Howard, about disruption around the ports. It's an interesting one, that. I mean, I think it's wise to prepare that, yes, there will be disruption at the ports, and yes, there will be some element of vehicle stacking, queues, etc. I think there is debate, though, as to how extensive that might be. Kind of certainly up until this month, everybody had in their head, what happened about 4 years ago, when, for completely unrelated reason, the ports at Dover and Calais were closed, and Kent essentially became a lorry car park, which caused all sorts of understandable local concern. And there's an interesting difference of viewpoint as to whether we're facing that situation again come the 1st of January, because there's one school of argument to say, well, yes, the lorries will stack up in the event of a no deal. But there's another school of argument saying, well, actually, we know that there's going to be a problem, and so therefore people are not going to go to the wasted effort and wasted time, basically, of sending their vehicles to the ports, only for them to be stuck in the queues. So it could well be that actually, rather than Kent being a lorry car park, Kent actually becomes empty. That's taking it to the other extreme. The challenge, of course, though, is that we just don't know at the moment. And literally, we are living day by day, hour by hour, almost, waiting for the latest news to come from these negotiations, so that we can try and get some clarity as to what's going to happen, and then, of course, obviously advise our members accordingly. And we have been very vocal now on the media, on the broadcast media in particular, to get our position across the public as well.
Okay. Is there anything that your members would like us to be training our students about being around their vehicles? And we all know they take more space, but
yeah,
any feedback that you get back that says, if only instructors would do this, if only instructors would do that, is there anything we need to know that you've got the opportunity now to say to us? I mean, there's not many of us here, but this is recorded, and we do get quite a few thousand hits on this.
Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, in some respects, it almost feels like common sense issues, but I've written down 3 that sort of frequently come up. One is for other road users just to be aware of HGV blind spots. You know, we've all seen the stickers at the back of a lorry saying, "No, if you can't see my mirrors, I can't see you." Well, you know, it's true basically, and whilst you know that technology does develop, and particularly in London now, where with direct vision standards, HGVs are required to have all sorts of mirrors and cameras, etc., to sort of minimize as many blind spots as possible. Clearly, you know, given the size and structure of an HGV vehicle, there will be blind spots, and it's therefore what we think not unreasonable for other motorists, other road users to be aware of those. You know, that lorry drivers can't always see everybody. The second one is about turning circles, just to be aware, you know, that a lorry sort of coming off a main road into a sort of a fairly minor road will necessarily have to move out, possibly into the middle of the road in order to complete the turn, just to be aware of that. And the other one is stopping distances of an HGV. I can remember when I was doing my driving test, albeit this was my car driving test many years ago, you know, stopping distance, I remember, was a key part of the test. And, you know, it's just to bear in mind that a fully laden HGV lorry, you know, it takes some distance for it to come to a halt, and it's for people to be aware of that. And I think one thing which does annoy our members, you know, are these people on some drivers on the motorways, you know, who will go into sort of a space between one lorry and the lorry ahead, you know, in lane one, perhaps not appreciating the stopping distance that a lorry might have in the event of an emergency. So it's those kind of things that
It's not the stopping distance though, is it? To be honest with you, Chris. And the thing is, when I was doing some studying for the LGV sector about 6 or 7 years ago, and one of the documents I was given mentioned some government research that there was not a theory, but there was a formula that was put together for lorries driving at 30 miles an hour. Any lorry driving at 30 miles an hour, say you've got a 3.5 ton van, which our guys would be familiar with on the category B license, that if that vehicle fully loaded at 3.5 tons travels at 30 miles an hour and hits a stationary obstacle, it hits that stationary obstacle at 4 times its mass at impact. So it would hit at 14 tons. Now that's when you're saying about cars going between lorries, there's a real bone of contention there with people that often do that. And yeah, you're quite right. Us ADIs, especially if we're doing fleet work, we don't do an awful lot of training on motorways, although it does happen now with learners, but it's mainly the fleet trainers that have got to be getting the point across about the lorry drivers. It's all well saying, well, these things are slow uphill and everything else. Their mass impact is absolutely phenomenal. It really is.
And it's the momentum as well,
yeah,
you know, behind a lorry. Which is why, of course, we have the weight limits, you know, because, so to ensure, you know, that within reason, a fully laden lorry can stop. But sometimes, as I say, I think it's just to re-emphasise that those points to learners would be very welcome.
That's okay. Well, if we go on to the next slide, then please, Olivia, if you will. So we're going to talk now about driver shortages in the UK in the LGV sector. 2005 was when I qualified to do fleets with the DVSA, and in those days there, that the shortage of LGV drivers, that was when he said LGV, we weren't talking about 3.5 ton drivers, we're talking about 7.5 ton and above, was 38,000 drivers shortage. And the reason that was given for that was the fact that in that time when the internet and software production and design was really starting to get together, they were cleaner industries. People always thought that the lorry industry and transport was a dirty industry, and it probably was a bit more in those days. So people didn't want to get dirty. Why should they get all dirty and everything else when they could earn as much money or more in a clean environment, making software or programs for companies. Now 2021, that figure is in the region of 60,000. Now, perhaps, Chris, you may have, I know I discussed this with you last week, and you had a reason, part of the reason why you thought that we've now got to a 60,000 situation.
Yes, so I'm just scribbling some notes just to make sure I get them across. Yes, so no, you're quite right to point out that there is a 60,000 shortage, and that's obviously sort of a critical nature for our industry, because obviously we need to get the drivers in place, you know, so that the goods can be transported cost effectively and efficiently, basically, which is what our customers demand ultimately. Why is there a driver shortage? Well, I think it's two things. Firstly, you've touched on one point, which is actually maybe the image of the industry isn't that attractive for today's up and coming, you know, school leavers. I'll touch on what we're trying to do about that in a minute. And of course, the second factor here, of course, is Brexit as well. We have been very reliant on European drivers coming over, and indeed there still are a lot of European EU drivers in the UK. But what we have found during the COVID is that some of them returned back to their home nations in the EU and have not returned. So that has sort of exacerbated the situation. So what are we doing about it? This whole perception of the industry and its image, because you know you're also right to point out, Howard, that you know this dirty tag I think is a little bit unfair, because modern lorries in particular are a delight, I think, to drive, and you know if it's in your blood as a tramper or as a lorry driver, then you know it's a great career. It really is a great career. But one of the there's a couple of points really to touch on in terms about the image of the industry. The first is about the availability of driver facilities, because you know our service stations are getting, or have been, you know, quite tired. I know some of them are being revamped. There's a program of investment which is welcome, but yes, there is this sort of issue about driver facilities, whether they could be modernised. There's also the perennial issue with of lorry parking, and that's all wrapped up with planning issues, and it is difficult, increasingly difficult for lorries to find a suitable parking space for them to have their, you know, legal rest periods. Yes, so those are sort of the two main things when it comes to sort of driver welfare and facilities. And the third thing, which we found actually during the pandemic, was a bit of a schizophrenic approach, actually, if I can describe it like that, from the public towards lorry drivers, because when the crisis first struck, you know, demand fell off a cliff, and there were empty supermarket shelves and all the rest of it. Well, of course, everybody wanted a haulier. Everybody wanted to see the lorries come to the rescue, you know, with the goods and all the rest of it. But I have to say that's an exception, because sometimes the attitudes towards lorry drivers can be a little bit hostile, which can be again off-putting. So what do we do about it? Well, it's all about promoting the haulage industry as a professional industry. It's highly regulated, and that's another thing we're very keen to point out. You know, it's highly regulated in terms of the hours that obviously drivers are permitted to do during a shift, are regulated in terms of the amount of weight they can carry, regulated in terms of emissions, and sort of general maintenance of the vehicles, because fortunately, you know, accidents that occur due to a defect behind the lorry are mercifully rare. The one which springs to mind is happened in Bath a few years ago now, where a poorly maintained lorry ran down a hill out of control. Quite rightly, that made headline news, and the operator was accordingly prosecuted, and again, quite rightly so. That is mercifully rare, though, because the general point is we are a very highly regulated industry, and our operators, the owners, take great pride, frankly, in wanting to operate a highly professional service. So that's the sort of kind of challenge that we're up against. It's sort of conveying that positive image in a way which sort of resonates with the public. One final point I would just make, we've launched something called the Road to Logistics campaign, which is our initiative to try and recruit more drivers into the industry. And it's particularly targeting, for example, the ex-forces, ex-armed forces people. And we also go into the schools and technical colleges, again, to promote the image of the industry, to say, it is a good career for those who want to take it up. So those are some of the issues and challenges that I would sort of touch upon in terms of the driver shortage in the UK and how we're trying to rectify it.
Well, you brought up a nice point there about the drivers having to go with hours. I mean, it's not just the drivers' hours that everyone thinks it is. There's the work from time directives as well. So they really are pressurised with trying to get from A to B. But you also mentioned about the blind spots and the guys having to pull up wherever they can. Is there any synergy? I know you're the Road Haulage Association and you're not a government body, but is there any synergy we might be able to do between your industry and our driver training industry, where we could get some of the haulier companies to work with driving schools and say, right, on a certain day of the week in the afternoon, we've got a couple of Pentecnican units here hitched up to a trailer, and what we'll do is we'll get them to sit in the driver's seat, have the cab turned at just a very slight angle, and then we'll see what can be seen from the driver's seat and get these guys, to get our lads, our kids educated.
Yeah.
And with the guys that drive those wagons or a transport manager as a little education thing. I mean, would there be any mileage in that? Could that be worked between the category B driver training industry? Because this could be another way of you getting the drivers you need as well. It could be the catalyst that starts sowing the seed of some kids saying, well, I don't know what I want to do. You put them in that educational environment, and it could, reap benefits to you. Is there any way we could talk about that? Any way we might be able to start something like that going?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we recognise that our outreach work, we do outreach work with different sectors. And as I say, at the moment, it's mainly through the Road to Logistics campaign. But more broadly, yes, absolutely. And we have a section of the RHA which is involved in that sort of outreach work. So going from that, absolutely, I think if I can put you in touch with the relevant section in the RHA, see where that takes us.
I think that'd be handy, Chris, because I'm sure there's areas around the country that have got these excellent places. I mean, there's one down at Exeter, there's some up in the Midlands, there's some up north. I know you can't get HGVs around there, but these organisations, all they want to do is to educate. All they want to do is to ensure that the people that are driving at the grassroots area in category B are going to be safe for the rest of their life. And they're not just trying to pass a test. They want to educate them forever. And I always feel that the driving test, before anyone goes and does the practical driving test, that there should be something on a logbook to say that they've been in a transit or Luton van and they've done some lessons in there of manoeuvring one of those vehicles around, and that gives them some idea of blind spots. But to put them into an LGV, whether it be a rigid or be an Arctic, I think really should be an experience that we ought to try to be an ambassador for, if we can, as a driving instructor association. If you and I could talk about that afterwards, and I'll have a chat with Carly as well and see if we can. I know it's not perhaps your remit in your particular role, but
no, absolutely. I think that let's make those links. And just a point to add to what you've just been saying there, Howard. One of the stakeholder groups that we are trying to reach out to is the cycling lobby, because
we're working on it ourselves.
So sorry.
We've been doing work on that. Olivia's been doing work on that with bikes. Is it Bike Smart or Bike Safe? She's been doing.
Bikeability, is it? Yeah, well, no, likewise, we are trying to reach out to cycling groups because clearly there is, there is an issue there, and it tends to get rather polarized, sadly, at the moment,
Yeah.
Which we're trying to calm down. And in a way, what we're trying to do, what we've been doing up till now, is sort of reaching out to local cycling groups, actually, who tend to be far more receptive to an approach by us. And our experience of when we've done that has actually been very positive, because it does make it's a two-way feast, actually. So from the cycling lobby, they then appreciate the importance and the dangers of blind spots and why we keep saying what we keep saying. But likewise, just to have that engagement with the cycling lobby so that we can get their perspective as well, it's very helpful.
Yeah, coming back to the point about what you were speaking with about the if we can hook up with lorries and get some ADIs and pupils potentially in them. We've used to do that quite a lot with our annual conferences, and we linked up with a company that used to supply a couple of lorries. I think they were rigid, but they were large vehicles, and they used to. Our members used to be able to come sit in them and get that view from that cab and to see, and I used to have a little drive around or off-road in them and things like that. So, and it was massively popular, because obviously it's benefiting them as a driver, and obviously any little bits, it was just a snippet of information, a little bit of time and little bits of information they can get from that short amount of time, because there was obviously a big queue for that thing. They were able to then feed that back into their training, and they remember that. So that was always really well received. So that would be amazing to be able to do something like that again.
I see there's a question just flashed up. Are you also dealing with the LGV associations? Is that directed at me or at Howard? So I can just clarify.
Yeah, it probably is directed to you, actually, Chris. We don't do an awful lot with LGV associations at the moment. We don't. You're the first organisation I've been speaking to for LGV for quite some time. But
yeah.
Are you dealing with any other organisations? Because some of the people
Yes.
that are LGV orientated.
Yeah, well, so I mean, for example, our fellow trade bodies are NLA, RT, ITB, etc. Interesting. I have to say no to those particular organisations. We do work very closely though with Logistics UK, what were the Freight Trade Association before they changed their name, and BVRLA. They're the organisation that looks after leasing of vans and HGVs. So yes, we are interconnected there in terms of safety campaigns, etc. But I'll certainly happy to take away those other organisations mentioned.
Okay, well, we'll move on to the next slide if we could, please, Olivia, because we were talking about cyclists a minute ago, and I believe the next slide's all to do with energy and emissions, and I know you want to spend some time talking.
Yes,
Chris. So if you want to go for it and let us know anything we can do in the chats, of any questions you want to put in the chats, and try and gauge some response from the people that are listening, then please go ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you, Howard. I mean, and as you probably gathered by now, this kind of is my day job and my particular interest, and I will be brief on it. But one of the reasons why I wanted to just raise this issue with you, just have an opportunity for debate. You'll be aware that the government has made a number of announcements over the last few weeks in terms of the climate change agenda, sort of the net zero agenda. Big ambition, that we move away from petrol and diesel powered vehicles. You'll know that they want to phase out the sale of new petrol and diesel cars and vans by 2030 and hybrids from 2035. And my day job, as I say, is then to work on that agenda from the HGV perspective, and I'll make just a couple of remarks on where we sit with that in a minute. But one of the reasons I just raised this subject, it was just to get your perspective or your members' perspective as to how you see this working for you. Are you, for example, planning, or you may already be driving electric vehicles, in which case it'd be great to just understand, how extensive that is. Or it could be that you are looking to switch to an EV vehicle in the near future. Is that very much on your mindset? Or are you taking a longer term view to say, actually, particularly if you've just invested in a brand new or fairly new conventional petrol or diesel vehicle, you're looking to see that lifespan, realize, the economic value of that lifespan before upgrading. Kind of just interesting to understand where we're going. Can you just forgive me? This has happened. Somebody just come at my door. Can you just bear with me?
That's all right. Howard and I can talk.
The situation we have in the industry is that although we have ADIs that are now going into using more electric vehicles, the commercial industry is as well. And I do a lot of work for Ocado, and I've been working, or was working for a while, a long time, up at Park Royal. And because of the FORS situation, the Fleet Operators Recognition Scheme, there are a lot of vehicles that are not allowed to travel into London at night, save for those, and the emissions, the ultra low emission zones that are up there, etc., which have to be noted. Places like Ocado, who spent millions of pounds on research, have actually bought a big fleet of electric 3.5-ton vans, but they did actually have some 7.5-ton vehicles too, all battery operated. There was nothing that was hybrid. It was all electric. The trainers that do the training on the electric vans went to the Energy Saving Trust and did the Energy Saving Safe Fuel Efficient course first, and then got re-invited back to do the electric conversion course for electric vehicles, for how they charge, the different charging methods, etc. We've all done that for a car. Well, the car didn't put us through. It was all free anyway. We went to a guy called Bob Saynor, who is the guy that runs the project for Category B, and he put us on the course. He ran around the country, and so we would been doing training for the likes of Ocado, but with the 7.5-ton vehicles at the time, they were not performing. And it was a situation where they loaded up the vehicles as much as they could with battery power, and when they put the payload on, they were right on the 7.5-ton limit. But it turned out the batteries weren't strong enough for the goods, and where they were told they were going to get, I think it was an 80 or 85 mile range out of one charge of batteries, because they were using these vehicles at night to move surplus foods around to sheltered places like Fair Share and the Felix project. They weren't getting anything like the mileage, because the drivers had the heaters on, obviously the lights were on, the fridges were working, and instead of getting the scope of mileage that they were purported to be able to do, they were having problems, and on 2 or 3 occasions those vehicles actually had to be recovered during the night. That was the only problem we had with the 7.5 tons, but the 3.5-ton vehicles, they are doing very, very well indeed, and they've been a great success for Ocado.
Yeah. And with the driving school side as well, we're starting to see some franchises and things like that emerging, where they're offering fully electric vehicles as well. So that it is very much on ADR's radars as well.
Yeah, thank you. I'm back now. It's the perils of working from home, isn't it?
That's okay. Yeah.
When you get
putting in the chats of their experiences of working with electric vehicles, so that Chris has got some idea. I mean, I've mentioned about the Ocado side of thing. If there's any fleet trainers that are listening at the moment who have got other experiences with other companies, then perhaps you can put it in the chats and let us know.
Yeah. I mean, and I came into this sort of halfway through your conversation there, Howard, which everything you just said there sort of resonated, in terms of, it's the viability and practicality now of sort of alternatively fueled vehicles, and particularly electric vehicles, because, these issues, common issues, aren't they? Range anxiety and also the availability of infrastructure, I think resonate quite deeply, certainly amongst the public. And, I realise the government is very keen to invest in the charging network, particularly for cars. And I think there's an all charging, forecourt is opened, I think, in Essex in the last couple of weeks, as part and parcel of that agenda. That's all fine. And I think just to bring it sort of back to where we stand from the HGV side, the first comment is that it is widely recognised, including by government, that to decarbonise the lorry fleet is a challenge for all sorts of technical reasons to do with, it's the weight, the power needed from the engine and the range requirements. That is obviously to be said though in a context where the technology is always improving, but perhaps not as fast, perhaps as some of our politicians would like. And again, going back to sort of the political agenda, for us, what I would say is that the political ambition to decarbonise and the technological potential to decarbonise is now very well understood. But for us in our sector, it's quite fundamental questions now of how we get there, how we get from where we are, which is in 2020, to where we want to be, which is net zero by 2050. And it feels that in this journey that some quite challenging conversations now need to be had, I think, with governments and with amongst various industry sectors to work out, okay, how do we move forwards? Someone described the current situation as a bit of a Mexican standoff at the moment, because as I say, we all understand the technological potential. We all understand, that there's potentially electric vehicles, we might get hydrogen fueled vehicles, there's gas powered vehicles, biofuels, but no one's ready at the moment to take that first step because, to mix my metaphors, we could end up with a VHS Betamax situation where no one basically wants to end up with Betamax that nobody wants. So for us, just to give you a flavour of where we're coming from on this, just to give that perspective, we feel that the next step forward really requires now a little bit of detailed work by ourselves and by government and by industry, is to understand use case needs, to sum up. What I mean by that is understanding what the right fuel is for the right application in the right circumstance. So, the battery electric combination, I think increasingly well understood now for an urban environment within a certain limited range. But I always often say, yes, but what about, say, forestry, or what about quarries, the machines that are needed there? What kind of fuel types are we looking for that? And that's taking it from one extreme to the other extreme. And then there's a whole range of different use cases between that. And we've been slightly worried that up till now that the government seems to be very in favour of battery electric as the way forward. And clearly that will work in some use cases, but we don't think it will work in all use case scenarios. So we just need to probe that a little bit better. And to be fair, the evidence base to understand this is developing. Last month, there was the so-called LEFT trials published. This was the low emission freight trials, which looked precisely at this, the different fuels for different use case scenarios. And there's been further investment announced for next year, £20 million, to look at hydrogen, the viability of hydrogen fuel cells to power lorries. But this is all very much in the developmental stage. And, here we are in 2020. We're supposed to get to net zero by 2050, which, okay, is 30 years away, but actually feels frighteningly close, I have to say, given the amount of development that needs to be done. And I think my final point, before sort of perhaps throwing it up to any questions, when on Wednesday, the Committee on Climate Change published their sixth carbon budget proposals. Again, quite dry on one hand, but actually really interesting, because they did actually now try and sort of articulate this tricky issue of how we get there. And when it comes to HGVs, their view is that by 2040, all new HGVs will be low carbon, in inverted commas. Now, that's a very interesting choice of words to say low carbon, because it implies that they're not expecting HGVs to be zero emission by 2040. It probably implies, but we need to tease this out, that new diesel HGVs will no longer be on sale from 2040, which therefore implies we're looking at sort of battery electric, but also CNG, LNG, biofuel, the so-called low carbon fuels as the way forward. So a whole plethora of issues, I think, that have to be sort of gripped, understood and debated. This is my day job at the RHA to do this for the haulage industry. And that's kind of just to give you the sense of where we are from the HGV perspective. To sum up, you know, the ambition is clear, but I think the sort of the question of how we get there now needs to be really worked through. And so, you know, bring it to your sector is again to get that feel. What do you think about this debate? And I go back to the questions I posed earlier, which was: are you looking to switch to electric vehicles in the immediate future? Waiting a little while? You know, what is your perspective?
Well, the ADIs a lot. I've being a membership organisation that we are, the phone calls we get the odd phone call saying, should I go for electric, etc. Or, you know, but there are some organisations that have been in touch with me fairly recently that have got some very good cases for ADIs going electric, because most of the ADIs, not everybody, but most of them live reasonably close to their training areas. And it means they've got to change their work remit a little bit and build, for want of a better word, build more breaks into their days, to be honest with you. So they'll probably go home for lunch and recharge the car for an hour, which they never used to before. They sit on the side of the road and have a sandwich with their petrol vehicle. So there are these changes in the routines that will take place. But the fact that the electric sales, or the sales of electric vehicles for driving schools, is definitely rising. There is no two ways about that, because all the time we've got the tax breaks on this, which ADIs get with new vehicles. There have been some pretty good government subsidies for buying electric vehicles in the first place, not just for driving schools, but for anybody who wanted an electric vehicle. I think at one stage there was a £5,000 subsidy given to people for buying a brand new electric vehicle. But there's also the tax incentives you get for business if you buy it in a certain way. So it can work out that there can be some quite considerable savings. They're still a little bit pricey in some respects, but they are less pricey than they otherwise would be if we didn't have the incentives given to us by the government. So I think a bit more government incentive, if it's possible to do that. We're going to spend a lot of money on COVID and keeping the industry going, all of the economy going. But if they really need to do this, for our industry, they would need to subsidise it a bit more.
Yeah, and that's very interesting feedback, Howard, because I'm hearing that from all sorts of other sectors as well. To give you a perspective, I also work with the ports, the seaports, on their decarbonisation agenda. I sit on an advisory group because there's considerable crossover between what they're looking to do to decarbonise the ports, you know, and there's that crossover to what we're trying to do in haulage. And this point keeps coming up that basically there needs to be some greater degree of certainty from government in terms of the financial and regulatory support that's going to become available. And for us, one of the key risks going forwards is this so-called stranded asset phenomenon. I don't know if you're familiar with stranded assets. Basically, a stranded asset is where the residual value, basically, of an asset, in our case, a vehicle, plummets because suddenly the regulatory system doesn't support it. And I can give you a good example when it comes to clean air zones, which has been a thorn in our side and we don't want it to be a thorn in our side because, we agree with the principle of clean air. Everybody wants clean air. But the way that the government has tried to achieve it has actually been, in our view, counterproductive because, as you're probably aware, in order to comply with a clean air zone, you have to be compliant with Euro 6 if you're a diesel vehicle. Well, what that's done is it's undermined the asset value of anything which is non-Euro 6. And we think, sort of the commerciality, the supply-demand factors, which, price vehicles and their values at certain levels is not particularly well understood in government at the moment. And that needs, I think, to be articulated going forwards and fed into the policy agenda. And the point is that this stranded asset issue is, I think, a common risk being, felt by all sorts of sectors. I know the ports are worried about it. We're certainly worried about it, and just be interested to, get that perspective from you as well.
Well, we're getting a lot of information where people are now more carbon footprint savvy. I mean, Chris has a very good question on here on the questions. I've read that the manufacture of batteries is not environmentally friendly, and that recycling is an issue. Also, the battery pack needs to be replaced. A car may end up with very poor residual values, which could mean a negative reaction to EVs in general in a few years' time. Now, I know that the Toyota Priuses, when they first came out, that they were the first version of the Prius. That was a problem with the batteries because they didn't do self-regenerating within the engineering of the vehicle. So the batteries didn't last very long. And the problem they had was, first of all, was disposing of the batteries and the cost of replacing batteries. In some cases, it wasn't worth that. The batteries are costing about £8,000 or £9,000 to replace, which made the vehicle almost worthless. When we put new batteries in there, those batteries and the life expectancy of the vehicle with the mileage on it, it just didn't go together. It didn't go like hand in hand. And so you had shells of Priuses in a scrapyard with no batteries in because people couldn't afford the batteries, because unless you've got a decent lease situation where batteries can be leased, a bit like getting an LGV cylinder from a hardware store. You go and get it refilled and you pay for the refill. You don't pay for the cylinder. You only pay for the cylinder once, but you're not getting that with batteries. If there's a system where batteries could be swapped over, be it like a recharge situation, and literally swap, but that technology is not there yet. That's the problem. That's what
and the issue raised by Chris Evans there absolutely resonates with me, and I think it's we've got it on our risk register, if you will, because again, when you look at the political debate and then sort of the technological reality, there's possibly a disconnect. I would say this as diplomatically as I can, because I think we've got to be careful, and this is a difficult message sometimes to get across to government. We've got to be careful not to be driven by dogma here. We've got to work within what is realistic, and certainly that's one of our messages that we keep saying to government on this agenda. And it's illustrated by this issue of the recyclability of batteries, because you're quite right. This could be an issue. And, if we're steamrolled into switching over to EVs only to find that we've got a recycling problem 5 years hence, that is a problem. Now, I have to say that's possibly an extreme scenario, because it's possible, that the market for batteries will develop, in such a way that their recyclability becomes more viable, et cetera, et cetera. But, these are still these quite gritty issues that sometimes our politicians don't like to hear about or want to engage with, that actually I think we do have a duty to point out, so that they are at least considered and can be worked through, so that we ultimately get to where we want to be, which is, I think, this net zero outcome by 2050.
Well, what we'll do, time's pushing on now, Chris, so we're going to have to move things on a bit now if we can.
Yes, of course.
We've mentioned earlier on about is anything that the DIA could do or the audience can do with the RHA. So we've covered the synergy thing.
Yep.
Unless there's any other things in the chats that people want to put in to say it's any other ideas that they might want to do as a synergy with the LGV sector, if we can put that sort of aim that towards you and see if you can give us a contact for it. But is there any more questions from anybody? I'm looking at the chats. We're trying to get chat screen open. Looks like we've got no, we seem to have it all seems to be what there is there, Chris.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I don't know what else you've got after this slide, Olivia. I'm not sure what's there. I can't. If you want to move on and show us what the next one is.
Yeah, the final slide is the next one. So that's it.
Okay.
Yeah. So, well, thank you for that discussion. That was really interesting to get that insight, Chris. You know, we've learned a lot from you today. I'm sure, Howard, you'll agree.
Yes, definitely. Well,
yeah.
what I'll do, Chris, is I'll get in touch with you after we've done this, perhaps on Monday if you're around. I'll have a chat with Carly and see if we can get a thing together where we can start talking about doing things together as a DIA with RHA and see if it's possible we can then put out to the membership and see if there's any synergies we can get going, especially with the education.
Yeah.
We can do for energy and get feedback for you about electric vehicles. We'll see if we can do that as well from our membership through the magazine.
I mean, the three issues you brought up earlier, Chris, about, you know, the blind spots and the turning circles and the stopping distances. I mean, certainly, you know, there might be something, if they're like your three biggest areas of concern, that could be something where we could, you know, as we could look to work with you, or you know, someone in your sector. That would be really great. So let's carry on talking in the background.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Indeed.
Well, just say thank you for inviting me, and yes, I look forward to continuing to work with you.
Right.
Okay.
Indeed.
Thank you very much then, and wishing everyone listening a good weekend, rest of your day. And if you're around next Friday for the 11 o'clock one with the next webinar, details will come out about that in the next few days. Okay, so thank you everyone, and I'm going to wrap the session up now. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Howard, and see you all next time. Thank you, everyone.
Take care then. Bye.